The auditorium breathed a sterile, self-satisfied air, a mixture of expensive air conditioning, new carpet, and the cloying scent of ambition. It was the kind of atmosphere designed to confer importance on everything that happened within its polished wood and brushed steel confines. On the stage, under the calculated warmth of professional lighting, Dean Alistair Finch was a portrait of academic success. His suit was Italian, his smile was predatory, and his voice was a finely tuned instrument of condescending charisma. He was speaking about the future, about a breakthrough so profound it would realign the very firmament of theoretical physics. The university, his university, was on the brink of immortality. At the very back of the room, standing in the shadows near an exit he had no intention of using yet, was Dr. Eris Thorne. He was the ghost at this feast of ghosts. Where Dean Finch was a study in tailored precision, Thorne was an exercise in frayed edges. His tweed jacket had surrendered to the inevitable sheen of age at the elbows, and his gray hair refused to conform to any particular style, existing as a soft, chaotic halo around a face etched with the quiet patience of a man who had spent more time with cosmic constants than with other people. He had been fired 3 months ago. His contract as an adjunct professor, a position he had held for 17 years, was simply not renewed. The reason given was departmental restructuring. The reason, he knew now as he watched Finch preen on stage, was grand larceny. Every word Finch spoke was a hammer blow against the anvil of Thorne's soul. The dean described a new theoretical model, a unifying principle that elegantly bridged the chasm between quantum mechanics and general relativity. He used words like paradigm-shifting and revolutionary. He spoke of the tireless efforts of our dedicated research team. He gestured to a massive screen where a complex, swirling diagram of mathematical notation glowed like a captured galaxy. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And it was Thorne's. He recognized it the way a father recognizes the face of his own child. Every equation, every symbol, every elegant twist of logic had been born not in the university's multi-million-dollar research labs, but in his cramped, book-stuffed office, on a battered chalkboard, under the dim glow of a flickering fluorescent light. He felt a strange detachment, a sort of clinical calm that settled over the rage. He was an observer of his own vivisection. He watched the audience, a collection of eager students, rival academics, and science journalists, lean forward, their faces alight with fascination. They were captivated by Finch's performance. They believed the lie because it was presented so beautifully, wrapped in the authority of a prestigious institution and delivered by a man who looked the part. Thorne, in his worn jacket, was just a man. Finch, in his armor of success, was the future. In the fifth row, Dr. Lena Petrova felt a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She was a junior research fellow, one of the few people who had been granted access to the quiet, brilliant world of Eris Thorne. She had been his de facto assistant, not by official assignment, but by her own choice. She had been drawn to his mind, to the quiet, monastic dedication with which he pursued truth. She had seen the work in its infancy. She had helped him check his calculations, her own considerable intellect humbled by the sheer, breathtaking scope of his vision. She had seen the chalkboard in his office covered in what she could only describe as divine scripture. And now she was watching Alistair Finch, a man who couldn't solve a differential equation without a graduate assistant, present that scripture as his own sermon. Her hands were clenched into fists in her lap, her knuckles white. She looked from the stage to the back of the room, where she could just make out Thorne's silhouette against the dim light of the exit sign. He was perfectly still, a stone wall against a rising tide of deceit. The air in the auditorium was thick with the manufactured gravitas of the event. Finch spoke of the Northwood unification model, giving the university's name to a theory that had been conceived miles away from its manicured campus in the quiet solitude of a man the university had deemed disposable. The name itself was an act of profound violence, a branding iron searing a false mark of ownership onto Thorne's very soul. Thorne listened, his expression unchanging. He was a man accustomed to the vast, silent indifference of the universe. The petty machinations of a university dean were, in comparison, a minor disturbance. But it was a disturbance that targeted the one thing he had ever truly built, the one thing that was wholly his. The silence of his life's work was now being filled with the booming echo of another man's voice. Finch was a master showman. He simplified the concepts just enough for the journalist to feel intelligent, while keeping the language complex enough to impress the academics. He spoke of symmetrical resonance and quantum entanglement on a macro-gravitational scale, phrases Thorne had coined in late-night scribbles on yellow legal pads. Hearing them from Finch's mouth felt like hearing a beloved poem recited by a man who did not understand the words. The beauty was still there, but the meaning, the spirit, had been hollowed out, replaced by the empty shell of ambition. Thorne thought of the thousands of hours, the years of his life that had been poured into that theory. The missed holidays, the solitary meals, the slow, patient unraveling of a cosmic secret. It was not a project. It was a pilgrimage. And Finch had just planted a flag on the holy ground, claiming it for himself. The presentation concluded with a crescendo of applause. Finch beamed, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of false modesty that was more arrogant than any boast. He opened the floor to questions, his eyes scanning the crowd for friendly faces, for the softball questions that would allow him to elaborate on his genius. A few hands went up. A reporter from a science journal asked about the practical applications. A professor from a rival department asked a technical question designed to show off his own knowledge. Finch handled them with slick, practiced ease. Then, a different kind of silence began to spread from the back of the room. It was not the silence of awe, but of anticipation. Eris Thorne had taken a single step forward, out of the deepest shadows. He did not raise his hand. He simply stood, waiting. His presence was a quiet, unmovable fact in the room full of shifting opinions and inflated egos. Finch's eyes eventually found him. For a moment, a flicker of genuine surprise, perhaps even fear, crossed the dean's face. He recovered quickly, his smile tightening into a mask of polite condescension. "Ah," Finch said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "Mr. Thorne, I wasn't aware you would be joining us. Do you have a question for the team?" The use of Mr. was a deliberate scalpel, intended to cut Thorne down, to remind him and everyone else of his diminished status. In the world of academia, it was the equivalent of a public stripping of rank. Thorne did not react to the insult. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried a strange density that seemed to absorb all other sound in the room. It was the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime in quiet contemplation, a voice that did not waste a single vibration. "It is not a question," Thorne said, his gaze locked on Finch. "It is a statement of fact." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The whispers in the auditorium died. The air grew tense. Lena Petrova felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to stand up, to shout, but she was frozen by the sheer, terrible gravity of the moment. Thorne took a slow breath. "That work you have just presented," he said, his voice as calm and steady as a law of physics. "The equations, the model, the diagram. It is not the university's. It is not the work of a team." Another pause. He let the implication hang in the air, a guillotine suspended over Finch's head. "That is my work." The three words landed with the force of a physical impact. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. For a moment there was pure, unadulterated shock. Finch's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of raw, unfiltered fury. He had not anticipated this. He had expected Thorne to fade away, to accept his dismissal with the same quiet resignation he had shown for 17 years. He had miscalculated. He had mistaken patience for weakness. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. Then Finch did the one thing he knew how to do. He laughed. It was not a genuine laugh, it was a weapon, a sharp barking sound designed to ridicule, to dismiss, to turn Thorne into a pathetic spectacle. "My goodness," Finch chuckled, shaking his head as if dealing with a confused child. "Eris, I understand that leaving the university can be difficult. Perhaps you feel a certain lingering attachment to some of the concepts you were peripherally involved with during your time here." He turned his smile on the audience, inviting them to share in the joke, to join him in pitying this sad, deluded old man. "But to claim the entire model as your own, that's quite a stretch, even for you." The humiliation was swift and brutal. Some in the audience chuckled along with him, relieved to have the tension broken. Others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the powerful man on the stage and the solitary figure at the back. Thorne did not flinch. He remained a statue of calm defiance, his quiet presence a stark contrast to Finch's loud, theatrical dismissal. "There is no team, Alistair," Thorne said, using the dean's first name, an act of quiet rebellion that stripped away the formal armor of his title. "There was only me, in my office, with my chalkboard, for the last 12 years. Finch's face hardened. The condescending mask slipped, revealing the sneering bully beneath. "I think you're confused, Mr. Thorne. Years of working in isolation can do that to a person. Your contributions were noted, of course, a minor consultant role, but the heavy lifting, the conceptual breakthrough, that was done by the department's best and brightest." He gestured vaguely behind him, as if to a phantom army of brilliant minds. It was a masterful lie, vague enough to be unprovable in the moment, and delivered with the full weight of his institutional authority. "I have my notes," Thorne stated simply. 12 years of them, every calculation, every dead end, every step of the discovery. Finch's eyes narrowed. He saw the danger now. This wasn't just a pathetic plea for attention. It was a genuine threat. He had to crush it, immediately and decisively. He leaned into the microphone, his voice taking on a tone of grave, feigned concern. "Security," he said, his voice cracking like a whip. "Could we please escort Mr. Thorne out? He is clearly unwell and is disrupting a very important event. Let's get him some water. Perhaps call someone for him." The command was a masterstroke of cruelty. It framed Thorne not as a dissenter, but as a mental patient. It painted his claim not as an accusation of theft, but as a symptom of delusion. 2 uniformed security guards, who had been standing impassively by the walls, began to move toward Thorne. They were hesitant at first, but Finch's sharp, impatient gesture spurred them on. The audience watched, a sea of conflicted faces. This was no longer an academic debate. It was a public execution. The sight of the 2 large guards converging on the frail-looking old man was deeply unsettling. Thorne did not move. He did not brace himself or raise his voice. He simply watched them approach, his expression one of profound disappointment rather than fear. He was not being arrested. He was being erased. Lena Petrova could not breathe. This was it, the moment of decision. She saw the guards reach Thorne. She saw one of them place a hand gently, almost apologetically, on his arm. She saw the dignity in Thorne's posture, the straightness of his back, the utter lack of shame in his eyes. He was losing, but he was not defeated. And in that moment, her own fear became insignificant. Her career, her position at the university, her carefully planned future, it all turned to dust compared to the colossal injustice she was witnessing. While Finch was busy directing the removal, turning back to the audience with a sigh of theatrical exasperation, Lena slipped out of her seat. She moved quickly, her head down, melting into the shadows along the side aisle. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She fumbled for her phone in her pocket, her fingers slick with nervous sweat. She had to do something. She had to make a call. It was a desperate, impossible long shot, a Hail Mary pass into the heart of the academic establishment. But it was the only move she had left. As the guards led him toward the exit, a strange sense of peace descended upon Eris Thorne. The noise of the auditorium, the whispers, Finch's booming voice, it all began to fade into a distant hum. His mind retreated from the ugly, polished present to a place of pure, unassailable truth. His office. He could smell it perfectly. The dry, sweet scent of aging paper, the sharp tang of chalk dust, the faint aroma of stale coffee from a forgotten mug. It was a sanctuary not of comfort, but of purpose. He remembered the specific night. A Tuesday in November, 3 years prior, rain had been lashing against the grimy window of his small, forgotten room in the oldest wing of the science building. Everyone else had gone home, the hallways dark and silent. He was alone with the problem, as he had been for years. The chasm between the two great pillars of physics had seemed wider than ever. He had filled and erased the chalkboard 100 times, a graveyard of failed attempts and beautiful but flawed ideas. He was tired. His eyes burned from staring at the symbols. His body ached. He was close to admitting defeat, to accepting that this particular cosmic secret would remain locked away. He had stood up, ready to pack his worn leather briefcase, when a thought had struck him. It wasn't a complex thought, but a simple, elegant inversion of a core assumption he had held for a decade. An idea so counterintuitive he had dismissed it out of hand countless times. But in that moment of utter exhaustion, his defenses were down. He picked up a fresh piece of chalk. The small, dry stick felt cool and solid in his hand. He turned back to the board. He started writing. The chalk flew across the slate, a frantic, desperate dance. His mind was no longer guiding his hand. It was racing to keep up. The equations began to flow, not as separate warring factions, but as a single, harmonious river. The quantum variables, once so chaotic, began to align with the smooth, sweeping curves of gravitational fields. He wasn't inventing. He was transcribing. He was taking dictation from the universe. It was the moment a sculptor finally sees the angel trapped in the marble. He remembered the feeling, not of triumph, but of profound, humbling awe. A wave of light and understanding had washed over him. A feeling of such intense clarity it was almost painful. He had stepped back, his hand trembling, and looked at the board. There it was, a single, beautiful, impossibly perfect line of mathematics that held the cosmos in its embrace. The Thorne inversion, he had called it in his notes. A quiet, private name for a universe-altering truth. He had stood there for an hour, unmoving, simply looking at it. The rain had stopped. The world outside was silent. In that small, dusty office he had touched the face of God. That memory was his fortress. Alistair Finch could steal the symbols, he could claim the discovery, he could have him thrown out into the street, but he could never touch the sanctity of that moment. He could never steal the memory of that quiet, rainy Tuesday night. That truth was Thorne's alone, and it was indestructible. The guard's hand on his arm felt distant, unreal. He was walking out of the auditorium, but in his mind he was still standing in front of that chalkboard, bathed in the silent, glorious light of revelation. Meanwhile, Lena Petrova was huddled in a small alcove in the lobby, her back pressed against the cool marble wall. Her phone felt alien in her trembling hand. She found the number she had scribbled down months ago, a relic from a conversation she'd barely registered at the time. Thorne had been reminiscing about his early career, about the handful of people who had understood the radical nature of his initial ideas. He had mentioned a brief but intense correspondence with a young, fiercely brilliant physicist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a man who had seen the promise in Thorne's work when others had dismissed it as heresy. That man's name was Julian Croft. Now, he wasn't just a brilliant physicist, he was a Nobel laureate, a titan of the field, a man whose name was spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints or founding fathers. Calling him was insane. It was like a parishioner trying to get the Pope on his personal line. She dialed the number for his office at MIT, expecting to be stonewalled by a series of administrative assistants. The first voice was, as expected, a crisp, efficient-sounding secretary. "Dr. Croft's office," the woman said, her tone suggesting she had no time for nonsense. "My name is Dr. Lena Petrova," Lena began, her own voice sounding thin and reedy to her ears. "I know this is highly unusual, but I need to speak with him urgently. It concerns the work of Dr. Eris Thorne. Dr. Croft is preparing for a colloquium. He is not available. If you'd like to leave a message—" "No, you don't understand," Lena interrupted, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "It's an emergency. An act of academic theft is happening right now, in public. They're stealing his life's work." There was a skeptical silence on the other end of the line. "Dr. Petrova, we receive calls like this quite often. If you have a formal complaint, you can submit it in writing to the Ethics Committee." Lena's mind raced. She needed a key, a password to get through this wall of bureaucracy. She remembered a specific phrase Thorne had used, a term so unique, so idiosyncratic to his theory that no one else would know it. It was the linchpin of his entire model. "Please," she begged, "just tell him this. Tell him it's about the Thorne inversion. Tell him Northwood University is presenting the Thorne inversion as their own." She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. The secretary's tone changed instantly from dismissive to alert. What did you call it?" "The Thorne inversion," Lena repeated more firmly this time. "He'll know what it means." "One moment," the secretary said, her voice now tight with a new kind of energy. Lena was put on hold. The tinny, synthesized music that filled the silence was the most stressful sound she had ever heard. Every second felt like an hour. She imagined Thorne being pushed out the door, the story ending there, with his humiliation complete. She was about to lose hope when the music cut off abruptly. A new voice came on the line. It was deep, resonant, and radiated an intellectual authority that was palpable even through the small speaker of her phone. It was a voice that did not suffer fools. "This is Julian Croft. To whom am I speaking, and why are you using that name?" Lena's throat went dry. She had gotten through. For a moment she was too starstruck to speak. "Dr. Croft," she stammered, "my name is Lena Petrova. I worked with Dr. Eris Thorne at Northwood. They fired him. And right now, the dean of the department, Alistair Finch, is on stage at a press conference, presenting the entire inversion model as the university's discovery." There was a long silence on the line. Lena's heart sank. Maybe he didn't remember. Maybe it had been too long. "Eris Thorne," Croft said finally, the name spoken with a quiet, thoughtful intensity. "Of course, the letters. Good God, I haven't heard from him in years. I always wondered what became of that work. It was revolutionary. Unorthodox, but revolutionary." He paused. "This press conference, is it being streamed online?" "Yes," Lena said quickly. "It's the Northwood Futures in Physics Symposium. It's on the university's main website." "Stay on the line, Dr. Petrova," Croft commanded. The sound of furious typing filled the background. "I'm pulling up the feed now." There was another pause, then a low, angry hiss. "That charlatan, that peacock. I see him, and I see the diagram behind him." Another, longer pause. "Son of a bitch," Croft muttered with the cold fury of a man witnessing a sacrilege. "He didn't even change the notation." Croft's voice was no longer just authoritative. It was glacial. "Dr. Petrova, you have done the right thing. Now, I need you to do one more thing for me. Go back into that auditorium, get as close to the stage as you can, and make sure your phone is pointed at that screen. I am going to join the conference." The line went dead. Lena stood frozen for a second, the impossible reality of what had just happened washing over her. She had reached the king, and the king was angry. A surge of adrenaline, pure and potent, flooded her system. She turned and ran back toward the auditorium doors. no longer a frightened subordinate but an agent of impending justice. Inside, Dean Finch had regained control. The unpleasantness with Thorne had been dealt with. The guards had escorted the old man out into the lobby, and the doors had swung shut behind them. Finch, ever the performer, had spun the incident to his advantage. "My apologies for that interruption," he said to the audience, his expression a carefully crafted blend of pity and resolve. "It's a sad reminder of the pressures of this field. Some minds, even brilliant ones, can sometimes lose their way. We wish Mr. Thorne all the best." He then seamlessly transitioned back to his triumphant narrative, taking another question about the timeline for experimental verification. He was basking in the restored glow of the spotlight, confident that the threat had been neutralized. He had won. The work was his. The glory was his. The future was his. He was in the middle of a self-congratulatory answer, smiling at a reporter in the front row, when the massive screen behind him flickered. The swirling, complex diagram of the Thorne inversion, now temporarily known as the Northwood unification model, vanished. It was replaced by a grainy, buffering symbol, then a stark, unadorned video feed. The face that appeared was not smiling. It was a face known to every single person in that room who had ever opened a physics textbook. Lean, hawkish, with piercing blue eyes under a shock of white hair and a brow furrowed with intellectual severity. It was Dr. Julian Croft, broadcast live from his office at MIT, and he looked incandescent with rage. A wave of confusion and awe swept through the auditorium. The low murmur of conversation died instantly. The silence that fell was absolute, a vacuum created by the sudden, shocking appearance of a deity in their midst. Finch, who had his back to the screen, was the last to notice. He faltered, his words trailing off as he sensed the dramatic shift in the room's atmosphere. He turned around slowly. When he saw the face on the screen, all the color drained from his own. He looked as though he had seen a ghost from a much, much higher plane of existence. Dr. Croft's image was steady, his gaze as sharp and focused as a laser. He ignored Finch completely, his eyes scanning the room as if he could see through the camera lens and into the very souls of the audience. His voice boomed from the auditorium's powerful sound system, a voice accustomed to absolute authority, a voice that had announced new laws of the universe. "My apologies for this unscheduled interruption," Croft began, his tone arctic. "My name is Dr. Julian Croft, from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I will not take much of your time." He did not need to introduce himself, but he did so anyway, a formal declaration of war. Finch, stammering, tried to seize the moment, to frame it as a wonderful surprise. "Dr. Croft, what an honor! We had no idea you'd be tuning in. A testament to the importance of the work we're doing here at Northwood." He smiled, a ghastly, terrified smile. Croft did not acknowledge him. It was a cut so deep and so public it was breathtaking to witness. He continued as if Finch had not spoken, as if he were a piece of furniture on the stage. "I was informed a few moments ago that a significant theoretical breakthrough was being announced at this event, a breakthrough authored by a Dr. Eris Thorne." Croft paused, letting the name hang in the air, a direct contradiction to everything Finch had claimed. "I need to know one thing. Is Dr. Eris Thorne present in this room?" The question was a thunderclap. He had used the title, Doctor, restoring the honor Finch had tried to strip away. He had named him as the author. In 2 sentences he had completely reframed the narrative. The entire audience was now a jury, and Finch was in the dock. From the side of the room, near the doors where she had re-entered, Lena Petrova found her voice. It was trembling, but it was clear. "They just threw him out," she shouted, her voice ringing in the stunned silence. Croft's gaze sharpened, a flicker of cold fire in his eyes. "I see," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He finally turned his attention to the man on the stage. He did not address him as Dean or Doctor. He addressed him as a specimen under a microscope. "Finch," he began, the name a curse. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. 15 years ago, I received a series of letters from a then unknown adjunct at your university. These letters contained the seeds of a theory so audacious, so brilliant, that I confess even I was skeptical at first. The author of those letters was Eris Thorne." Croft lifted something into the view of his camera. It was a sheaf of papers, yellowed with age. "These are those letters, dated, postmarked. In them, Dr. Thorne outlines the foundational principles of what he called the Thorne inversion. He describes its core mathematical framework, its philosophical implications. He even included early drafts of the very same diagrams you have displayed on this screen as your own." Finch was shrinking inside his expensive suit. He was visibly trembling, his face a mask of waxy, sweaty panic. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a man watching his entire world being dismantled, piece by piece, live in front of hundreds of his peers and the media. "For 12 years, Croft continued, his voice rising with controlled fury, "I have followed his progress from afar, through the occasional published paper, always in obscure journals, never given the platform he deserved. I watched him build his cathedral of logic, stone by painful stone, in academic exile. I knew he was close to a final, unified theory. What I did not know, what I could not have imagined, is that the institution employing him was not a patron, but a vulture, waiting for him to finish his life's work only to pick his intellectual bones clean." The metaphor was savage, and it landed with devastating force. Journalists were no longer taking notes. They were recording, their cameras all pointed at the unraveling dean. The university president, a portly man in the front row, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "The work you are presenting today," Croft declared, his voice a hammer of judgment, "is not the Northwood unification model. That is a fraudulent, contemptible name for a stolen masterpiece. Its true name is, and always will be, the Thorne inversion, and it represents what may be the single most important leap in theoretical physics in the last 50 years. A leap made not by your team, not by your department, but by the quiet, singular genius of the man you just had thrown out of this room like a piece of trash." Croft leaned closer to his camera, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. "You, sir," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl that filled every corner of the auditorium. "You are not a pioneer. You are a plagiarist, a thief, a disgrace to the sacred pursuit of knowledge that our profession is supposed to uphold. You have committed the cardinal sin of academia, and you have done it on the world stage. And I promise you, the entire world is now watching." The feed cut out. The screen went black. But the image of Julian Croft's face, etched with contempt, was burned into the retinas of everyone present. The silence in the room was no longer silent. It was screaming. It was the sound of a career ending, of a reputation being vaporized, of an institution's name being dragged through the mud and set on fire. Alistair Finch stood alone on the stage, a hollow man in a hollow suit, bathed in the sudden, harsh glare of the house lights. The show was over. The chaos that erupted was immediate and total. The university president, his face a mottled shade of purple, scrambled onto the stage and snatched the microphone from Finch's limp hand. He was babbling, stammering about a profound misunderstanding and a full internal investigation. It was the desperate, meaningless jargon of damage control, and no one was buying it. The reporters, who had been Finch's adoring audience minutes before, now swarmed the stage like sharks that had scented blood, shouting questions, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. "Dean Finch, is Dr. Croft's accusation true? Did you steal Dr. Thorne's work? What is the university's comment on the charge of plagiarism?" Finch was catatonic, his eyes wide and vacant. He was swept aside by university officials who formed a protective, if panicked, cordon around him, hustling him toward a side exit. The grand symposium on the future of physics had devolved into a public relations catastrophe of historic proportions. The president, still at the microphone, officially canceled the remainder of the event, his voice cracking with humiliation. Amid the pandemonium, Lena Petrova pushed her way through the panicked crowd, her eyes searching for one person. She found him just outside the main doors, where the two security guards who had removed him were now standing awkwardly, unsure of what to do. They hadn't forced him to leave the building, only the auditorium, and now they looked at him with a mixture of pity and dawning respect. Eris Thorne was standing calmly, watching the frenzy inside with a detached, sorrowful expression. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't triumphant. He looked like a man who had just watched his own house burn down to expose a criminal hiding inside. The victory was ashes in his mouth. "Dr. Thorne," Lena said, her voice catching in her throat. "Did you hear?" He turned to her, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "I heard, Lena. It seems Dr. Croft has a long memory." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And a very effective communication style. Thank you, I know it was you." Before she could respond, a new presence made itself known. A black town car had pulled up to the curb, and two people in sharp, businesslike suits stepped out. They moved with an air of quiet, efficient purpose that cut through the surrounding chaos. They were from MIT's Legal and Academic Affairs Department. Dr. Croft, it seemed, had not just made a phone call. He had dispatched his legions. "Dr. Eris Thorne," the woman asked, her voice respectful but firm. "My name is Catherine Riley. Dr. Croft sent us. He would like us to escort you from here. He has already arranged for your accommodation and would like to speak with you personally as soon as you are settled." They positioned themselves on either side of Thorne, not as guards, but as an honor guard, shielding him from the reporters who were now beginning to spill out of the auditorium, having realized the real story was no longer on the stage, but right here. Just as they were about to guide him to the car, the university president, a man named Wallace Bierce, broke through the throng. He was disheveled, his tie askew, his face slick with sweat. He rushed toward Thorne, his hands outstretched in a gesture of pathetic supplication. "Eris, Dr. Thorne, a terrible, terrible mistake," he panted. "Alistair Finch has been suspended, effective immediately. We will get to the bottom of this, I assure you. Your work, your place at this university. We can fix this." Thorne looked at the desperate, crumbling man before him. He saw not a leader, but a bureaucrat, a man whose only real concern was the preservation of the institution's brand. He felt no anger, only a profound weariness. He gently shook his head. "Truth is not a negotiation, Wallace," Thorne said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "It is a constant. You cannot fix it. You can only acknowledge it." He paused, looking past Bierce at the grand facade of the science building, a place where he had toiled in obscurity for 17 years. "You didn't value my work when it was just truth. You only value it now that it has become famous." With that, he turned away from the president and allowed Catherine Riley to guide him toward the waiting car. He did not look back. He left the wreckage of Northwood University behind him, a smoking crater of its own arrogance, and drove away toward a future he had never sought, but had unequivocally earned. The epilogue of Alistair Finch's career was written swiftly and in the merciless ink of public disgrace. He was fired the next day, not just suspended. His tenure was revoked in a special emergency meeting of the Board of Trustees, a brutal and rarely used measure. The academic papers he had published over the last decade were subjected to intense scrutiny, and a pattern of appropriating the work of graduate students and junior faculty was quickly uncovered. The Northwood unification model was just his most audacious and final act of intellectual piracy. He became a pariah. No other university would hire him. He was stripped of honors and awards. His name became a cautionary tale, a verb used among academics. Don't get finched. The university itself bled for years. It was hit with a barrage of lawsuits, not just from Thorne, but from other faculty members who now felt emboldened to come forward. Enrollment in the physics department plummeted. Major donors pulled their funding. The Northwood name, which Finch had tried to attach to a stolen theory of the cosmos, became synonymous with fraud. President Bierce was forced into an early retirement 6 months later. The institution spent the better part of the next decade trying to scrub the stain of the symposium from its legacy, a slow, painful, and expensive process of rebuilding trust. In the wake of the scandal, a consortium of leading research universities, spearheaded by relentless Dr. Julian Croft at MIT, established a new set of ethical guidelines for intellectual property. It created robust, independent channels for non-tenured and adjunct faculty to register their research, protecting them from exploitation by the institutions that employed them. It became a new standard in academic ethics, and though its official name was the Collaborative Research Integrity Mandate, everyone in the field knew it by its unofficial title, the Thorne Protocol. Eris Thorne, however, was far removed from the noise of the fallout. He accepted the offer from MIT not with glee, but with a quiet sense of homecoming. He was given an endowed chair, the Einstein Professorship of Theoretical Physics. He was given a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling chalkboards, a team of the brightest graduate students in the world, and, most importantly, the freedom and resources to follow his mind wherever it led. His first official act was to hire Dr. Lena Petrova as his chief research fellow, making her a partner in his work. He never grew comfortable with the fame. He politely declined most interviews and turned down lucrative book deals. He was a scientist, not a celebrity. His joy was not found in the applause of the crowd, but in the silent, elegant beauty of an equation unfolding correctly. He was the same man he had always been. The world had simply changed its perception of him. He still wore his comfortable frayed tweed jackets. He still lost track of time, working late into the night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the thrill of the chase. The only difference was that now, when he had a breakthrough, the world listened. About a year after the symposium, he received a letter. It was from Alistair Finch. The letter was short, stripped of all its former author's arrogance. It was a simple, desperate request for a meeting. Against the advice of his colleagues, Thorne agreed. They met in a small neutral cafe in Cambridge. The man who sat across from Thorne was a ghost of the preening peacock from the Northwood stage. Finch had lost weight. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple, ill-fitting polo shirt. His eyes, once sharp and predatory, were now haunted and dull. He looked broken. "I don't know why you agreed to see me," Finch began, his voice raspy. "Perhaps because I was curious," Thorne replied gently. Finch stared into his coffee cup. "There's nothing I can say that will change what I did," he said. "I know that. Sorry is a pathetic, meaningless word. I was a fraud, my entire career. It was all built on the work of others. Yours was just the biggest theft. I was arrogant. I was a coward. And I destroyed my life." He finally looked up, and Thorne was startled to see tears welling in his eyes. "I just wanted to say it to your face, to tell you that I know what I did. It was evil." Thorne listened patiently without judgment. He saw not a monster, but a man hollowed out by his own ambition, a man who had flown too close to a sun he had not built himself. "What you did was wrong, Alistair," Thorne said, his voice even. "It caused great pain. But a life is not a single act. It is a long, continuous story. The question is not what you were. The question is what you will be now." Finch shook his head. "I'm nothing. I have nothing. I teach introductory math at a community college under a different name. It's all I could get." "Then teach," Thorne said simply. "Teach them about the beauty of numbers, and teach them about ethics. Tell them your story. Not as a way to seek pity, but as a warning. Use the wreckage of your first life to build a better foundation for others. Redemption is not a gift you are given. It is a structure you must build, one honest brick at a time." For the first time, a flicker of something other than despair appeared in Finch's eyes. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a possibility. a narrow, difficult path out of the abyss he had dug for himself. They sat in silence for a few more minutes before Finch stood up, thanked him, and left. Thorne never saw him again, but years later he heard a story about a brilliant and unusually passionate community college professor who was renowned for his tough but inspiring lectures on academic integrity. Thorne paid for their coffees and walked out into the crisp autumn air of the MIT campus. He walked back to his office, the noise of his brief intersection with fame and ruin fading behind him. He entered the quiet sanctuary, picked up a piece of chalk, and turned to the vast black slate that covered the wall. There were new galaxies to explore, new universal secrets to unlock. He began to write, and as the familiar, elegant symbols bloomed on the board, he was finally completely home.